Picture this. A billionaire stands on stage, mocking his wife in front of 400 people. He calls her a maid. Too simple. Too stupid. The crowd laughs. She walks out bleeding. But what he doesn't know, she owns everything. His company, his empire, his entire world. And in exactly 3 weeks, she's going to take it all back. This is the story of how one speech destroyed a man who thought he was untouchable. Stay until the end, because the revenge, it's absolutely perfect. Sarah Mitchell woke to the familiar sensation of nausea rolling through her stomach like a wave. Morning sickness. 14 weeks now, though nobody knew except her friend Emily. She'd been keeping the secret close, waiting for the perfect moment to tell Derek. Tonight would be that moment. The other side of their king-size bed was already empty. Through the open door of their master bathroom, she could hear the rhythmic pounding of Derek's feet on the treadmill in their home gym. Even at 6:30 in the morning, he was already working, AirPods in, probably on a conference call with investors in Tokyo or London. Sarah pressed her hand to her still flat belly and smiled. Tonight, everything would change. She pulled herself out of bed and walked to the bathroom, catching her reflection in the mirror. At 34, she looked younger than her years, though lately she'd noticed new lines around her eyes. Worry lines, her mother would have called them. Sarah called them marriage lines. In her jewelry box, hidden beneath her grandmother's pearls, was the ultrasound photo. She'd been to the doctor 3 days ago, lone as usual. Derek had been in meetings. The technician had printed 2 copies of the image showing their tiny baby, arms and legs visible now, heart beating strong. Sarah had stared at that screen and made her decision. Tonight at the gala, after Derek's keynote speech, she would show him the photo. And then she would tell him the other secret. The one about the company. 6 months ago, while organizing paperwork for her mother's nursing home admission, Sarah had found documents from her father's estate. Her father, Samuel Richardson, had died when she was 25, 9 years before she met Derek. She'd been so lost in grief that she'd let his estate attorney, Thomas Whitmore, handle everything. She'd signed in papers without reading them, accepted the trust fund without asking questions. But 6 months ago, sorting through old files, she'd found the name SM Capital Partners on a corporate document. A quick Google search had led to a phone call, then a meeting, then the truth. Her father had invested her inheritance, turning it into a venture capital fund. SM Capital stood for Samuel Mitchell Capital, named after him and using Sarah's married name. And that fund owned 78% of Mitchell Capital, the private equity firm Derek believed he'd built from nothing. Sarah had funded her husband's entire empire without knowing it. She'd spent the last 6 months watching Derek, wondering if she should tell him. Part of her wanted to, but a larger part wanted to wait, to see if he loved her for herself, not for what she owned. Tonight, with the pregnancy announcement, seemed like the right time. They'd celebrate the baby, and then she'd reveal the truth about the company. They'd finally be real partners. If only he'd look at her the way he used to. Sarah dressed in simple yoga pants and a loose sweater, then made her way downstairs to their penthouse kitchen. The morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows was beautiful, illuminating the marble countertops and custom cabinets that some designer had chosen. Sarah had wanted something warmer, cozier, but Derek said the penthouse needed to reflect their status. She made herself herbal tea, avoiding the coffee she desperately wanted. Pregnancy rules. She was reading an article on her phone when Derek strode in, still sweaty from his workout, phone pressed to his ear. "No, tell them we're not budging on valuation," he said into the phone, not looking at Sarah. "If they want in on the Soul deal, they pay our price." He grabbed a protein shake from the fridge. "Vanessa agrees with me. She's been working the Korean investors all week. Smart woman. Knows how to close." Vanessa Hunt, Derek's chief strategy officer, former Miss Rhode Island, Wharton MBA, senator's daughter. Sarah had met her exactly twice in 3 years. Both times, Vanessa had looked at Sarah the way someone might look at outdated furniture in a house they were planning to renovate. Derek ended his call and finally glanced at Sarah. "You okay? You look pale." "I'm fine," Sarah said, forcing a smile. "Just nervous about tonight." "Why?" Derek downed half his protein shake in one gulp. "It's my night. You just need to show up and look presentable." He checked his phone, thumbs already flying over the screen. "Wear the blue dress, not the black one. It washes you out." Sarah felt a small cut of his words, but pushed it aside. He was stressed. The Forbes feature 3 months ago, naming him one of the 40 under 40, had created enormous pressure. His parents expected him to prove he was more than just Judge Robert Mitchell's son. Derek was desperate to make his mark. Derek, Sarah started, I was thinking maybe after your speech tonight, we could... Babe, can you make sure the caterer confirmed the caviar? That's your thing. Details. He kissed the top of her head absently, already walking away. I've got to shower and get to the office. Vanessa and I have to finalize the speech. Sarah watched him go, her hand moving unconsciously to her belly. Tonight, she told herself. Tonight, everything changes. At 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Derek's parents, Robert and Patricia Mitchell, had driven in from Greenwich for the gala. Sarah opened the door to find Patricia already critiquing her appearance with a single glance. Sarah, darling, Patricia said, air kissing near Sarah's cheeks without actually making contact. Her mother-in-law smelled like Chanel No. 5 and old money. I brought you something. She handed Sarah a Bergdorf Goodman shopping bag. Inside was an enormous, hideous floral scarf. For tonight, Patricia explained, gesturing vaguely at Sarah's body, to draw attention away from, well, you know. Sarah looked down at herself, confused. Away from what? Robert Mitchell swept past both of them, already talking to Derek about the Forbes article. Son, I saw the piece. Self-made billionaire. Strong narrative. Your mother and I are pleased you finally stepped out of my shadow. They settled in the breakfast nook. Patricia and Robert at the head of the table. Sarah relegated to the side like help. Derek beamed under his father's rare praise. Tonight's going to cement it, Derek said. I'm keynoting. Vanessa helped me write the speech. It's going to be perfect. Vanessa is such a gem, Patricia cooed. Senator Hunt's daughter. Excellent breeding, very polished. She glanced at Sarah with what might have been pity. So refreshing. Sarah tried to join the conversation. I'm excited to hear your speech, Derek. Maybe afterward we could... Babe, Derek interrupted without looking up from his phone. Can you make sure the caterer has everything? That's what you're good at. Details. The small cuts were adding up. Sarah excused herself and went upstairs to their bedroom. She pulled out her phone and texted Emily. Still planning to tell him tonight? Emily's response came immediately. You sure about this? I saw how he looked at you at yoga last week, like you were invisible. Sarah stared at the message. She wanted to defend Derek, to explain that he was under pressure, that he'd be different once he knew about the baby. But doubt crept in. When was the last time he'd really seen her? Really listened? Her phone buzzed with another text from Derek, this one in a group chat that included his parents and, she noticed with a sinking feeling, Vanessa. Reminder, gala seating. Dad and Mom at table 1 with me and Vanessa, business head table. Sarah, you're at table 8 with the spouses. Makes sense logistically. I need to work the room. Sarah read it 3 times. Table 8, with the spouses, away from her own husband at his biggest night. She called Emily. He put me at the spouse table, Sarah said when her friend answered. The what? Table 8, in the back. Derek's sitting with his parents and Vanessa at the head table. He says it's logistics. Emily was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, honey, when are you going to see what everyone else sees? What do you mean? He's having an affair with her, with Vanessa. It's so obvious. No, Sarah said automatically. They work together. He's never... Wake up, Emily said, her voice gentle but firm. A man who loves you doesn't seat you away from him at the most important night of his life. A man who loves you doesn't call you at 6 a.m. to make sure you handled the caviar. A man who loves you doesn't spend more time with his colleague than his wife. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to her ear, one hand on her belly. After tonight, she whispered, everything will be different. When he knows about the baby, when I tell him about the company, we'll finally be partners. I hope you're right, Emily said. I really do. But Sarah, if he doesn't react the way you hope, if he doesn't see you even then, promise me you'll stop waiting for permission to claim what's yours. I promise, Sarah said, though she didn't believe she'd need to keep it. She spent the afternoon at the salon with Emily, getting her hair and makeup on their varnish. The stylist suggested an updo, something sophisticated, But Sarah asked for soft waves, less intimidating, more approachable, the kind of style Derek used to like, back when he noticed her hair at all. "You're glowing," the makeup artist said, applying a light foundation. "Special occasion?" "My husband's keynote speech," Sarah said, "at a charity gala." "Lucky woman," the artist replied, not knowing that Sarah would have traded all the galas in the world for a quiet dinner where Derek actually looked at her. At 6 o'clock, Sarah stood in front of her closet, the blue dress Derek had specified laid out on the bed. It was conservative, high-necked, the kind of dress that said "wife of" rather than anything else. She touched her belly, hidden under the fabric. In 4 more months, she wouldn't be able to hide the pregnancy. People would know. Derek would have to acknowledge her then, wouldn't he? She put on the hideous scarf Patricia had given her, then immediately took it off. Some lines couldn't be crossed, even for the sake of peace. In her clutch, she tucked the ultrasound photo. The plan was simple. After Derek's speech, she'd pull him aside, show him the photo, watch his face light up with joy. Then, in that moment of happiness, she'd tell him about SM Capital Partners, about the trust, about how they'd been building his empire together all along. Even if he hadn't known it, it would be perfect. It had to be perfect. Because if it wasn't, if Derek didn't react the way she hoped, Sarah would have to face a truth she'd been avoiding for 8 years, that she'd married a man who'd never really wanted a partner. He'd wanted a maid, and she'd been too in love to see the difference. Tonight would tell her which version of her husband was real. The man she'd fallen in love with 8 years ago at that charity auction, full of dreams and ambition and promise. Or the man who texted her about caviar and seated her at table 8. Sarah looked at herself in the mirror one last time. Soft waves, minimal makeup, the blue dress. She looked like exactly what Derek's mother wanted her to be. Appropriate, forgettable, safe. She touched her belly one more time and whispered to the baby, "Your father's going to be so happy when he finds out about you. Everything's going to change." She picked up her clutch with the ultrasound photo inside and headed for the door. Sarah Mitchell had no idea that in 4 hours her entire world would shatter. She had no idea that the man she'd loved for 8 years had been planning her humiliation for weeks. She had no idea that the company she'd secretly owned, the empire she'd unknowingly built, would become her only weapon in a war she didn't yet know she was fighting. All she knew was that tonight, finally, Derek would see her. She was right about that. He would see her, and then he would try to destroy her. But Sarah Mitchell had one advantage her husband didn't know about. She wasn't just the quiet wife in the blue dress. She was the woman who owned everything he'd built. And when he finally pushed her too far, when he humiliated her in front of 400 people and called her a maid while his mistress laughed, Sarah would stop being silent. She would start waiting for permission. And she would show Derek Mitchell and everyone else in that ballroom exactly who the real queen was. But that was still 4 hours away. For now, Sarah climbed into her 5-year-old Honda Accord, the sensible car Derek had insisted she drive while he took the Bentley, and headed to the Plaza Hotel. Tonight would change everything. She just didn't know how right she was. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom glittered like something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, reflecting light onto walls draped in silver and white. 400 guests in black tie and evening gowns mingled beneath banners bearing the Mitchell Capital logo. Photographers lined a red carpet outside, cameras flashing as Manhattan's elite arrived one by one. Sarah stood near the coat check, smoothing down her blue dress and feeling completely out of place. She'd been told to meet Derek inside, that it would be better for optics if he arrived with Vanessa on the red carpet. "Business partners," he'd said, the face of the firm. She watched the entrance screens as Derek stepped out of a black town car, looking like he'd walked off the cover of GQ in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo, and there, taking his offered arm, was Vanessa Hunt. The mistress wore red, not just any red, but a scarlet Versace gown with a thigh-high slit that showed off legs that went on forever. Her blonde hair was styled in old Hollywood waves, her lips painted to match the dress. She looked like sex and power and everything Sarah wasn't. Derek's hand found the small of Vanessa's back as they posed for photos, both of them smiling like they owned the world. Maybe they did. Sarah certainly felt like she owned nothing in that moment, standing alone by the coat check in her safe blue dress. "Sarah!" Emily appeared at her elbow, taking one look at the entrance screens and then at Sarah's face. I'm going to kill him. It's fine, Sarah said automatically. He's working. That's Vanessa, his colleague. His hand is on her ass, Sarah. Emily, Sarah dear, you're blocking the walkway. Patricia Mitchell appeared like a perfumed apparition, waving Sarah away from the entrance. Go find your table, table 8, in the back. Her mother-in-law's dismissive hand gesture made Sarah feel like a servant being sent to the kitchen. Sarah made her way through the crowd, past tables 1 through 7, each filled with investors, board members, and Manhattan's power players. Table 8 was tucked in a corner, populated by other spouses, a few junior employees, and the company accountant's wife who Sarah had met exactly once. From her seat, Sarah could see table 1 perfectly. Derek sat center stage, his parents on one side, Vanessa on the other. Throughout dinner, Derek's hand kept finding its way to Vanessa's knee under the table. Sarah watched it happen 3 times, each instance like a small cut to her heart. She touched her clutch where the ultrasound photo waited. After his speech, she told herself, after his speech, everything changes. Dinner was some elaborate 7-course meal that Sarah couldn't taste. The woman next to her, wife of a junior analyst, made polite conversation about their summer in the Hamptons. Sarah smiled and nodded, her eyes constantly drawn back to table 1, to her husband's hand on another woman's leg. At 8:15, the lights dimmed. An MC took the stage. And now the man of the hour, Forbes 40 under 40, the architect of the Mitchell Capital miracle, Derek Mitchell. The ballroom erupted in applause. Derek stood adjusting his cufflinks with practiced ease and made his way to the stage. He looked powerful, confident, every inch the self-made billionaire his PR team had created. Sarah's hand moved to her belly under the table. This is it, she thought. After this speech, I'll tell him about the baby, about the company, about us. Derek took the microphone, his smile bright and perfect. Thank you. 8 years ago, I had a dream. Sarah had heard this opening before. It was his standard speech, the rags to riches story his publicist had crafted. Never mind that he'd come from Connecticut money, that his father was a federal judge, that he'd never actually experienced struggle. The narrative was what mattered. I wanted to build a firm that could compete with Blackstone, with KKR, with the giants. People said I was crazy. Derek's voice carried perfectly through the room. Derek, you're just Judge Mitchell's son. You'll never escape his shadow. Sarah watched Robert Mitchell nod approvingly at table 1. This was the story Derek needed to tell, the one that proved he'd surpassed his father's accomplishments. But I had something they didn't see, Derek continued, his confidence growing. Vision. And I had the courage to bet on myself when nobody else would. Sarah's fingers tightened on her clutch. She knew the truth. The bet on himself had been her money, her father's legacy, SM Capital Partners funding every deal. But she'd stayed silent, wanting him to feel successful on his own. Tonight, she'd tell him the truth. Tonight, they'd celebrate together. You want to know the real secret to success? Derek leaned into the microphone, conspiratorial now. The room leaned with him. It's knowing which people elevate you and which people are just comfortable. Something in his tone changed. Sarah felt it like a shift in barometric pressure before a storm. See, there are 2 types of women in this world. No, Sarah thought. Don't. Derek gestured toward Vanessa, who stood up with a practiced smile, even did a little curtsy. The audience laughed, charmed. There are queens, Derek said, taking Vanessa's hand and kissing it like they were in some romantic movie. Women who can walk into a boardroom in Tokyo and close a $300 million deal before lunch. Women who speak Mandarin, understand derivatives, look good doing it. Women who push you to be better. These women are rare. They're tigresses. They're partners. Sarah's stomach dropped. She knew what was coming. Somehow she knew. Derek's tone shifted again, becoming condescending, almost amused. And then he pointed directly at Sarah. The spotlight found her immediately. 400 faces turned to stare. There are helpers. The word landed like a slap. Sarah sat frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. Now don't get me wrong, Derek continued, his voice carrying that fake joviality of someone telling a joke at someone else's expense. Helpers are important. Every successful man needs one. Laughter rippled through the crowd, uncomfortable at first, but growing. Helpers are the women who make sure your dry cleaning is picked up, who remember your mother's birthday, who organize the— He paused for effect. What is it, honey? The linen closet? The laughter grew louder. Sarah felt Emily's hand grip hers under the table, but she couldn't move. Her champagne glass, the one she hadn't touched because of the pregnancy, was gripped so hard in her other hand that she felt it crack. My wife Sarah is a phenomenal helper, Derek said, warming to his theme now. She's simple, uncomplicated, low maintenance. While Vanessa here is negotiating with the Korean Development Bank, Sarah's at home making sure the housekeeper didn't miss a spot on the tile grout. Blood dripped from Sarah's palm where the cracked glass had cut her. She didn't feel it. Sarah actually asked me once. Derek was fully laughing now, the audience laughing with him. Even his parents were chuckling. She asked if private equity meant we owned a horse farm. A horse farm. The ballroom erupted, tables 1 through 7 laughing like Derek had told the joke of the century. Only table 8 sat in horrified silence, everyone carefully not looking at Sarah. But God bless her. She tries, Derek said, building to his closing. She doesn't understand leverage ratios or capital structures, but she can tell you which thread count makes the softest sheets. And that's a skill. He raised his glass, the ultimate insult packaged as a toast. So here's what I've learned. Surround yourself with queens in the boardroom. He looked at Vanessa with unmistakable affection. And keep a good maid at home to make sure life runs smoothly. He winked directly at Sarah. Both important. Different leagues, but both important. To the queens, he clinked glasses with Vanessa. And to the maids who make sure our castles don't fall apart. The crowd, after a beat of shocked silence, erupted in applause and laughter. Vanessa leaned into the microphone, playful. Derek, you're terrible. She slapped his arm and kissed his cheek. What? Derek grinned. I'm joking. Sarah knows I love her. She's just shy. Can't handle the spotlight like you can, babe. Sarah stood. The champagne glass fell from her hand, shattering on the floor. Blood dripped from her palm onto the white tablecloth, spreading like a wound. Sarah, Emily started, but Sarah was already moving. She walked toward the exit, not running, not crying yet, just moving with the mechanical precision of someone in shock. The crowd parted for her, their faces a blur of pity and amusement and secondhand embarrassment. Sit down, Patricia Mitchell hissed as Sarah passed table 1. You're embarrassing him. Sarah kept walking. From the stage, Derek's voice carried through the room. See? Sensitive. She's very sensitive. That's why I keep the business stuff separate. She can't handle the pressure. More laughter. Sarah reached the ballroom doors and pushed through them, her vision starting to blur at the edges. Behind her, Derek was already moving on with his speech, talking about fourth quarter projections, the Tokyo expansion, future plans. The ballroom had already forgotten about the bleeding woman who'd fled. She was just a funny anecdote now, the punchline to Derek Mitchell's joke about success. Sarah made it to the parking garage before the tears came. She found her Honda Accord, 3 levels down, far from the gleaming luxury cars near the entrance. Her hands shook so badly she could barely get the key in the door. Finally inside, she locked the doors and let herself break. He'd called her a maid in front of 400 people, on a live stream that was probably being watched by thousands more. He'd compared her to his mistress and found her lacking in every possible way. He'd reduced 8 years of marriage, 8 years of supporting his dreams, to jokes about linen closets and thread counts. And the worst part? Everyone had laughed. Sarah's phone busted, text messages flooding in. Derek, babe, where'd you go? You're being dramatic. Patricia, very inappropriate exit, Sarah. We'll discuss this. Unknown numbers. Screenshots of her frozen face, blood dripping from her hand, memes already starting. She opened Twitter, a mistake she'd immediately regret. The live stream clips were everywhere. Hashtag help her wife trending. Hashtag made not queen. Hashtag Mitchell Gala disaster. Comments ranged from supportive to cruel, but they all had one thing in common. Everyone had an opinion about her humiliation. This man is trash. Divorce him, sis. She married a billionaire and complains he works? Gold digger mad the gold moved on LOL. Ladies, this is why you need your own money. Imagine being publicly roasted by your own husband. I'd die. Sarah let the phone fall to her lap. She looked down at her hand, still bleeding, and carefully wrapped it in tissues from her glove compartment. Then she opened her clutch with shaking fingers and pulled out the ultrasound photo. Her baby, their baby, the announcement she'd been so excited to make. I was going to have to tell him tonight, she whispered to the photo. I was going to say, we're having a baby. Let's build something together. Let me tell you the truth about the company. I thought he'd be happy. I thought he loved me. Her phone rang. Emily. Sarah said when she answered, her voice dead. I'm coming to get you. Don't drive. Where are you? I'm pregnant, Sarah said. It was the first time she'd said it out loud to anyone. I'm 14 weeks pregnant. I was going to tell him tonight. I had the ultrasound photo in my purse. I was going to show him after his speech. Emily was quiet for a long moment. Oh, honey. I was also going to tell him about my father's trust, about how I own his company, that I funded everything. I was going to give it to him, as a gift. I was going to say, let's be partners. Let's build this together. Honestly, I thought, Sarah laughed, bitter and broken. I thought tonight would change everything. It did, Emily said quietly. Just not the way you hoped. He doesn't want a partner, Sarah whispered. He wants a maid, and I've been too stupid to see it. You're not stupid. You're in love. There's a difference, but Sarah, you can't go back to him. Not after this. I can't leave him. I'm pregnant. I'm trapped. If I leave, he'll fight me for custody. His parents will destroy me in court. I have no job. No, you have a company, Emily interrupted. You own his world. He just doesn't know it yet. Sarah looked at the ultrasound photo again. Her baby, her child. Could she raise a child with a man who just called her a maid in front of 400 people? Could she bring a baby into a marriage where she was the punchline? I was going to give him everything, Sarah said. The company, the truth, partnership. He threw it away. For her, for applause. So take it back, Emily said. Sarah sat in her car, hands still bleeding, mascara running, the ultrasound photoball of her baby clutched in her other hand. Above her, in the Plaza Hotel, her husband was probably still giving his speech, still accepting congratulations, still basking in his success. The success she'd funded without knowing it. Call Thomas Whitmore, Sarah said suddenly. The estate attorney. Tell him I need to see him tomorrow morning. First thing. Sarah and Emily, don't tell anyone where I am, especially not Derek. Let him wonder. She hung up and stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, blood on her blue dress. She looked exactly how she felt. Destroyed. But underneath the tears, underneath the humiliation, something else was stirring. Something harder, angrier. Derek Mitchell had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd humiliated a woman who owned everything he thought he'd built. He'd called her a maid in front of the world, not knowing she was the queen who held his fate in her hands. Sarah touched her belly one more time. I'm not doing this for revenge, she whispered to her baby. I'm doing this for you. You're not growing up in a world where people can treat your mother like a servant. She started the car and drove away from the Plaza Hotel, away from the gala, away from the man she'd loved for 8 years. She didn't know where she was going yet. All she knew was that she couldn't go back to the penthouse, back to Derek, back to being the helper wife who organized linen closets while her husband built empires on her money. The old Sarah, the one who'd walked into that ballroom tonight with hope and an ultrasound photo, was gone. Derek had destroyed her with his speech, with his jokes, with his casual cruelty. But Sarah Mitchell wasn't finished. She was just beginning. And before this was over, Derek would learn a truth that would shatter everything he thought he knew. The maid he'd mocked, the helper he'd dismissed, the simple wife he'd humiliated, owned every brick of the empire he claimed to have built. And she was about to take it all back. Sarah woke on Emily's couch to the sound of her phone exploding with notifications. 18 million views. That's how many people had watched Derek's speech in the 12 hours since the gala. She reached for her phone with a hand still bandaged from where the champagne glass had cut her. Emily had driven her here last night, made her tea, helped her wash the blood out of her dress, and tucked her into the guest bedroom. But Sarah hadn't slept. She'd lain awake, one hand on her belly, replaying every word of Derek's speech until it was seared into her memory. Helper, maid, simple, too stupid to understand private equity. Now, in the harsh light of morning, she scrolled through Twitter and felt her stomach drop. The hashtag helperwife was trending #1 worldwide. Her face, frozen in that moment of shock, had become a meme. Someone had added a thought bubble. When you realize you married a monster? Another version, that moment you know you're getting divorced. The comments ranged from supportive to vicious, but they all had one thing in common. Everyone was talking about her. Sarah Mitchell, the wife Derek had humiliated, was suddenly famous for all the wrong reasons. At 6:07 a.m., Derek finally texted, "Babe, where'd you go? You're being dramatic." Sarah stared at the message. Not "I'm sorry," not "Are you okay?" Just accusation, wrapped in a pet name that now felt like an insult. She didn't respond. At 6:30, her mother-in-law texted in the family group chat that still included Sarah, though she suspected that would change soon. "Very inappropriate exit last night, Sarah. You made Derek look bad in front of investors. We'll discuss this when you've calmed down." Sarah had made Derek look bad. Not Derek, who'd called her a maid. Not Derek, who'd compared her unfavorably to his mistress in front of 400 people. She was the problem. Emily appeared in the doorway, already dressed for her nursing shift. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm living in an alternate universe," Sarah said. She held up her phone. "People are making memes of my face. I saw some of them are actually defending you, if that helps." "It doesn't." Emily sat on the edge of the couch. "What are you going to do?" Before Sarah could answer, her phone rang. Derek. She let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, he called again, then again. On the fourth call, Sarah answered. "Where the hell are you?" "Oh." Derek's voice was sharp, annoyed. "I wake up and you're just going, not even a note?" "I'm at Emily's." "Why, because of last night?" He laughed, actually laughed. "Babe, come on, it was a joke. Everyone's being way too sensitive about this." Sarah closed her eyes. "You called me a maid, Derek. I called you a helper. There's a difference, and it was obviously a joke. You know I was just working the crowd, right? That's what you do at these events. You tell stories, make people laugh. It's networking. You told 400 people I'm too stupid to understand your business." "Our business," Derek corrected, missing the irony entirely. "And I never said stupid. I said simple, uncomplicated." "Those are compliments, Sarah. Most women would kill to be called low maintenance." Sarah felt something inside her crystallize. This wasn't denial. This was gaslighting, pure and simple. Derek genuinely believed he'd done nothing wrong. "The video has 18 million views," Sarah said quietly. "I know, my publicist is thrilled. We're getting incredible engagement. This is amazing for the firm's visibility." He paused. "Look, I need you to come home and do a joint statement with me. Something about how we both understand humor, how strong marriages can laugh together, blah, blah, blah." The PR team already drafted it. "You want me to tell the world I thought it was funny? I want you to stop making this into a thing when it's not a thing. Jesus, Sarah, why do you always have to be so dramatic?" His tone shifted to irritation. "I have investors pulling back because of this circus. The Tokyo deal is in jeopardy. All because you couldn't take a joke and had to make a scene." "I made a scene by leaving?" "Yes, you embarrassed me. In front of my father, in front of investors, in front of everyone who matters. You always do this. Make everything about you." Sarah felt the last thread of hope snap. "I'm not coming home, Derek. Don't be ridiculous. Where else are you going to go? Emily's one-bedroom apartment? Come on, babe, you're being childish." "Goodbye, Derek." She hung up before he could respond. Her hands were shaking, but underneath the fear was something else. Relief. She'd finally said no. The next 72 hours were a masterclass in public humiliation. Sarah tried to go to Whole Foods for groceries and a stranger recognized her, yelling across the produce section, Helper wife, did you organize any good linen closets today? Other shoppers laughed. Sarah abandoned her cart and left. She tried to get coffee at the Starbucks near Emily's apartment. The barista, maybe 19 years old, whispered to her coworker while making Sarah's latte. Both of them stared. One took a photo when Sarah wasn't looking. The worst came on day 3. Sarah was checking her mailbox in Emily's building when a tabloid reporter appeared from nowhere. Mrs. Mitchell, Vanessa just posted on Instagram about the gala. Says you're misunderstanding professional dynamics. Any comment? Sarah turned to see the reporter's phone already recording. Behind him, a photographer was taking pictures. She was wearing yoga pants and one of Emily's old sweatshirts, no makeup, hair in a messy bun. This was how the world would see her next, disheveled, broken, the abandoned wife. No comment, Sarah said, trying to get past them. Is it true you're filing for divorce? Sources say Derek's planning to claim you abandoned the marriage. Can you confirm? Sarah made it to the elevator, jabbing the button repeatedly. The reporter followed. Mrs. Mitchell, viewers want to know, do you really not understand what private equity means? Was that part true? The elevator doors closed on his smirk. Sarah slid down the wall and sat on the floor, hyperventilating. She was 14 weeks pregnant, being harassed by tabloid reporters, and the entire world thought she was either a gold digger or an idiot or both. Her phone rang. Her mother. Mom, Sarah answered, desperate for support. Honey, I saw the video, Diane said from her nursing home in Ohio. That boy on the news, your husband. Mom, I really don't want to. He's not wrong, sweetheart. Sarah felt like she'd been punched. What? You never did finish your MBA, did you? You were always more, well, domestic. Maybe he needs someone on his level. You two were always an odd match. He's so ambitious, so driven, and you're so, well, quiet. Mom, I'm just saying don't make waves. You have a good life, nice apartment, security. Sometimes we have to swallow our pride for stability, especially at your age. You're 34 now. Starting over would be hard. Sarah hung up without saying goodbye. She sat on the elevator floor, hand on her belly where her baby grew, and felt utterly alone. Even her own mother thought Derek was right to humiliate her. Her phone buzzed with a notification. New York Magazine had published an article, The Helper Wife, Inside Derek Mitchell's Crumbling Marriage. Sarah read it on Emily's couch, wrapped in a blanket, despite the warm apartment. The article was brutal. It painted Derek as a brilliant but troubled CEO whose marriage had been on the rocks for years. Anonymous sources, probably Derek's PR team, claimed Sarah had always been fragile, that she'd never fit into Manhattan society, that she'd struggled with the demands of being married to someone so successful. There was even a quote from someone identified only as a family friend that made Sarah's blood run cold. Sarah comes from a very different background. Derek tried to help her adjust to his world, but some people just aren't built for this level of success. We worry about how this is affecting him professionally. They'd flip the entire narrative. Derek wasn't the villain who'd publicly humiliated his wife. He was the victim, burdened by a wife who couldn't keep up. Sarah's phone rang again. Thomas Whitmore, her father's estate attorney. Mrs. Mitchell, he said when she answered, I got your message from Emily. I've been reviewing the trust documents. We need to talk about SM Capital Partners. Can it wait? Sarah asked, too exhausted to care about the company right now. I'm in the middle of a crisis. No, Whitmore said firmly, it can't wait, because your crisis just got worse. SM Capital Partners received a letter this morning from Derek's legal team. He's calling an emergency board meeting to review the silent partner's role in the company. He wants to renegotiate terms. Sarah sat up. He wants to renegotiate. He's claiming that the viral video has damaged the company's reputation and that SM Capital Partners, as the majority stakeholder, should have reined in his behavior or provided PR support. It's nonsense, legally speaking, but Sarah, Whitmore paused. He's also filing for divorce. The room tilted. What? His lawyers served papers to your old address an hour ago. When you weren't there, they called me, knowing I handle your family's affairs. Sarah, he's not just divorcing you. He's asking for primary custody of any potential children, claiming you're emotionally unstable. I'm pregnant, Sarah whispered. Silence on the other end. Then, does he know? No, I was going to tell him at the gala. Laura laughed, the sound bitter. I had the ultrasound photo in my purse. I thought he'd be happy. Oh, Sarah. Whitmore's voice softened. How far along? 14 weeks? This changes everything. The moment Derek finds out, he'll use it. File for a custody before you even give birth. Paint you as the unfit mother while he's the stable, successful father. Whitmore paused. Unless we tell him who really owns Mitchell Capital first. Sarah thought about the last 3 days. The memes, the harassment, her own mother telling her to swallow her pride. She thought about Derek's text, calling her dramatic. She thought about him on that stage, calling her a maid while 400 people laughed. What happens if we reveal my ownership? Sarah asked. Everything, Whitmore said simply. His entire narrative collapses. The self-made billionaire story, gone. He's been building an empire on your father's money, on your trust, for 8 years without knowing it. Every deal he's closed, every acquisition, every genius move has been funded by you. Would it stop the divorce? No. But it would shift the power dynamic entirely. Right now, he thinks he holds all the cards. Rich husband, poor dependent wife. But Sarah, you're not dependent. You own 78% of Mitchell Capital. You've been the primary stakeholder from day one. In a divorce, you wouldn't be fighting for scraps. You'd be the one deciding what he gets to keep. Sarah touched her belly. I was going to give it to him, the company. I was going to tell him the truth and then just sign it over. I wanted him to know we built it together. And now, Sarah thought about Derek's hand on Vanessa's leg, the red Versace dress, the speech about queens and maids, the 18 million people who'd watched her humiliation, the tabloid reporters outside Emily's building, her mother telling her not to make waves. Now I want to survive, Sarah said quietly. I have a baby coming. I need to protect my child. Then I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning, Whitmore said. I'm assembling a team. Lawyers, accountants, PR specialists. We're going to do a full audit of Mitchell Capital's finances. And Sarah, I think we're going to find some things that will help your case. What kind of things? The kind that turn a divorce into a criminal investigation. After hanging up, Sarah sat in Emily's living room, hand on her belly, and made a decision. She wasn't going back to Derek. She wasn't releasing a statement saying she understood his humor. She wasn't going to fade quietly into the background while he and Vanessa built their empire on her money. She was going to fight, not for revenge, though that would be a pleasant side effect. Not for money, though, she'd take what was rightfully hers. She was going to fight for her baby, for the child growing inside her who deserved a mother who stood up for herself, who deserved to grow up knowing that your value isn't determined by how much someone else values you. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened Twitter one more time. The helper wife hashtag was still trending, but now there were other voices in the mix. Women sharing their own stories of being underestimated, dismissed, called too simple or too sensitive. A movement was building, and Sarah was at its center. She typed out her first public statement since the gala. For 8 years, I supported my husband's dreams. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. I made myself small so he could feel big. That ends now. To every woman who's been called too simple, too sensitive, too emotional, your worth isn't determined by who sees it. It's determined by what you build. And I built something. Derek just doesn't know it yet. She hit send before she could overthink it. Within an hour, the tweet had 200,000 likes. Within 3 hours, it was trending. News outlets were picking it up, analyzing it, speculating about what Sarah meant by, I built something. What? Derek called 17 times. Sarah didn't answer. His 18th call went to voicemail. She could hear the panic in his voice. Sarah, what the hell is that tweet supposed to mean? My lawyers are going crazy. Delete it. Now, call me back. This is not a game. But it wasn't a game. It was war. And Derek had fired the first shot 3 days ago when he'd called her a maid in front of the world. Now Sarah was going to show him what happened when you underestimated the quiet woman in the corner. The one who'd been funding your empire without you knowing it. The one who'd been keeping your secrets. The one who'd stayed silent for 8 years while you built your reputation on her money. Sarah Mitchell, the helper wife, was done being silent, and Derek was about to learn that the maid he'd mocked owned the entire castle. 4 days after the gala, Sarah woke to a sensation she'd never felt before. Sharp, stabbing pain low in her abdomen. For a moment, she lay still, hoping it would pass. Then she felt it, wetness between her legs. She threw back the blanket on Emily's couch and saw blood. Sarah screamed. Emily! Her friend ran from the bedroom, took one look, and grabbed her keys. Hospital, now! The next hour blurred into a nightmare of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. Sarah lay on a gurney in the emergency room of St. Luke's Hospital, an ultrasound wand pressed against her belly, praying harder than she'd ever prayed in her life. Please, she whispered to the ER doctor, a man with kind eyes and graying hair whose name tag read Dr. James Walsh. Please tell me my baby's okay. Dr. Walsh stared at the screen, his expression focused. The room was silent except for Emily holding Sarah's hand and the rhythmic beeping of monitors. Then Sarah heard it, the heartbeat, faint but there. Your baby is alive, Dr. Walsh said carefully. The heartbeat is present, but it's stressed, Mrs. Mitchell. You're spotting at 15 weeks, which is concerning. Have you experienced any physical trauma, falls, anything like that? No, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. I've been careful, so careful. What about emotional trauma? Sarah laughed bitter. Does viral humiliation count? Dr. Walsh glanced at Emily, then back at Sarah. I saw the video, I'm sorry. But Mrs. Mitchell, I need to be very direct with you. Stress at the level you've been experiencing can absolutely threaten a pregnancy. Your cortisol levels are extremely elevated. Is my baby going to die? Sarah asked, the words barely a whisper. Not if we can stabilize you, Dr. Walsh said, but you need to eliminate the stressors in your life immediately. I'm ordering bed rest for a minimum of 72 hours, and you need emotional support. Is your husband here? No, yeah. Can we call him? Sarah thought about Derek's last voicemail, the one where he'd demanded she delete her tweet and called her dramatic. He's the stressor. Dr. Walsh and Emily exchanged a long look. Mrs. Mitchell, the doctor said gently, I'm going to be very direct with you because your baby's life depends on it. If you continue under this level of stress, you will miscarry. Your body cannot sustain a pregnancy when it's in constant fight or flight mode. You need to make a choice, your marriage or your baby. Sarah looked at the ultrasound screen where her tiny baby floated, heart beating, fighting to survive. She thought about Derek's speech, the memes, the hashtags, the divorce papers that were being prepared, the custody battle that would paint her as unstable, and she made her choice. My baby, Sarah said firmly, looking Dr. Walsh in the eye. I choose my baby. Emily squeezed her hand. I'll call Derek and tell him. No, Sarah interrupted. Don't tell him. He doesn't get to know, not after what he did. Sarah, I was going to tell him at the gala, Sarah said, her voice rising. I had the ultrasound photo in my purse. I was going to show him after his speech. And instead, he called me a maid in front of 400 people. He lost the right to know about this baby when he chose to humiliate me on national television. Dr. Walsh looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Mitchell, regardless of your marital problems, he's the biological father. He has a legal right. He gave up that right, Sarah said, her hand protectively over her belly, when he told 400 people I'm too stupid to understand his business. The business I own. The words were out before Sarah could stop them. Emily's eyes went wide. Dr. Walsh looked confused. I'm sorry, the doctor said. Sarah was too exhausted, too scared, too overwhelmed to care anymore. I own Mitchell Capital. Through my father's trust, 78%. Derek doesn't know. He thinks he built it. But it was always mine. I funded everything. Every deal, every acquisition, every genius move everyone thinks he made. It was my money. My father's legacy. Sarah, Emily breathed. Why didn't you tell Tim? Because I wanted him to love me, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. Not what I owned. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I supported him, he'd see my value as a person, not a bank account. I was going to tell him at the gala, about the baby, about the company. I was going to give it all to him, say, let's build this together as partners. She laughed, the sound broken. But he doesn't want a partner. He wants a queen for business and a maid for home. So he gets neither. Dr. Walsh was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm going to give you some advice that has nothing to do with medicine. Whatever you're planning, whatever you're thinking about doing, you need to do it fast. Because in 4 months, you're going to have a newborn baby, and everything will be 100 times harder. What are you saying? I'm saying if you need to fight, fight now. While you still have the energy, while you can still think clearly, because once that baby comes, you'll be sleep deprived and vulnerable, and men like your husband will use that against you. Sarah stared at this stranger who'd just given her the most honest advice anyone had offered in days. Thank you, she whispered. Dr. Walsh nodded. I'm admitting you overnight for observation. We need to make sure the bleeding stops and the baby stabilizes. But Mrs. Mitchell, after you're released, you have a decision to make. Keep living in fear and stress and risk losing this pregnancy, or eliminate the threat and give your baby a fighting chance. After Dr. Walsh left, Emily climbed onto the hospital bed next to Sarah, careful not to disturb the monitors. You own his company, Emily said. It wasn't a question. I do. And you never told him. I wanted him to love me for me. Sarah looked at her friend. How pathetic is that? I had all the power all along, and I gave it away because I wanted him to love me. That's not pathetic, Emily said fiercely. That's being human. You loved him. You trusted him. He betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. But Sarah, you still have the power. He just doesn't know it. Yet, Sarah said. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling the slight curve that would soon become impossible to hide. But he's going to find out. And when he does, I want to see his face when he realizes the maid was the queen all along. Sarah spent that night in the hospital, hooked up to monitors, watching her baby's heartbeat stay steady on the screen. The bleeding had stopped. The crisis was over for now. But Dr. Walsh had been clear. One more major stressor and she could lose everything. At 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, Sarah did something she'd been avoiding. She Googled Derek. The search results were eye-opening. In the 4 days since the gala, Derek had become a divisive figure. Some defended him, saying people were too sensitive, that it was just a joke. But others, especially women, were calling him out. Several female investors had publicly stated they were reconsidering their positions with Mitchell. Capital. A planned profile in Fortune magazine had been canceled. The most damning article was in Business Insider. Mitchell Capital faces investor backlash after CEO's controversial speech. Sarah read it twice, memorizing every word. Derek was losing business over this. His father's contacts were distancing themselves. The Tokyo deal, the one he'd mentioned in voicemails, was officially dead. Derek Mitchell had humiliated his wife, and it was destroying him professionally. Good, Sarah thought, then immediately felt guilty, but only for a moment. At 6 a.m., her phone rang. Thomas Whitmore. Mrs. Mitchell, where are you? St. Luke's Hospital, Sarah said. I had some bleeding. The baby's okay, but I'm on bed rest. Whitmore was quiet for a moment. Does Derek know you're pregnant? No, and I'm not telling him. Sarah, he's going to find out eventually. And when he does, I want to be in a position of power, Sarah interrupted. You said you were doing an audit of Mitchell Capital's finances. What have you found? Whitmore's tone changed, became sharper. Can anyone overhear this conversation? Sarah looked around her private room. No, just me. Then we need to talk about what Derek's been doing with your company's money. For the next 20 minutes, Thomas Whitmore laid out a financial crime spree that made Sarah's blood run cold. Derek hadn't just been running Mitchell Capital. He'd been systematically embezzling from it $11.7 million over 18 months, funneled through a shell company called VH Consulting LLC, registered in the Cayman Islands, owned by Vanessa Hunt. Vanessa, Sarah breathed. He's been stealing from my company to pay for his mistress. Not just paying, Whitmore said grimly. Vanessa's Tribeca apartment. Down payment came from VH Consulting. Her Porsche? Titled to VH Consulting. Every trip they took, every piece of jewelry, every expensive dinner, all charged to Mitchell Capital's client entertainment budget or funneled through this shell company. That's embezzlement. Yes, and it gets worse. We found emails between Derek and his divorce attorney, dated 1 week before the gala. Sarah's heart sank. What did they say? Whitmore read the email aloud. Every word was a knife. Derek had been planning to divorce her for weeks. The gala speech hadn't been a drunken mistake or a joke gone wrong. It had been premeditated character assassination, designed to lay the groundwork for a custody battle where he'd claim she was unstable, dependent, unfit. He played me, Sarah whispered. Everything. The nice morning of the gala, telling me to wear the blue dress, seating me at table 8. It was all planned. He was setting me up. Yes, Whitmore said simply. But Sarah, he made one critical mistake. What's that? He did all of this thinking you were powerless, thinking you had no money, no resources, no way to fight back. He built his entire strategy on the assumption that you're the dependent housewife he described in his speech. He has no idea you're the majority owner of the company he's been stealing from. Sarah thought about Derek's voicemails, demanding she come home and release a statement. Thought about him calling her dramatic when she wouldn't comply. He genuinely believed he held all the power. What do I do? Sarah asked. You let him file for divorce. Let him walk into court confident and arrogant. Let him bring his witnesses, his affidavits from his mother, and his therapist claiming you're unstable. Let him think he's winning. And then, at the perfect moment, we reveal the truth, that you own his company, that he's been embezzling from you, that everything he thinks he built was actually yours all along. When? When will hurt him most, Whitmore said. In court, in front of a judge, on the record, where everyone can see the self-made billionaire crumble when he learns he's been living off his wife's money for 8 years. Sarah closed her eyes, one hand on her belly, where her baby grew. I don't want revenge. This isn't revenge, Sarah. This is survival. Derek's going to fight you for custody of your child. He's going to use every resource at his disposal to paint you as an unfit mother. The only way to protect your baby is to show the world who really holds the power. And right now, that's you. You just need to claim it. After Whitmore hung up, Sarah lay in the hospital bed, watching dawn break over Manhattan through her window. Somewhere out there, Derek was waking up in their penthouse, probably with Vanessa, planning his next move, filing divorce papers, preparing custody arguments, thinking he'd already won. He had no idea the war was just beginning, and he had no idea he'd chosen the wrong woman to humiliate. Sarah touched her belly one more time. I'm going to protect you, she whispered to her baby. Whatever it takes. Your father tried to take everything from us, so we're going to take it back. Not for revenge, for justice, for survival, for you. Dr. Walsh released her the next morning with the strict orders. Complete bed rest for 1 week, no stress, no confrontations. Sarah went back to Emily's apartment and did exactly what he said. She rested, she ate, she took her prenatal vitamins, and she let Thomas Whitmore build her case. 1 week later, Sarah was ready for war, and Derek Mitchell had no idea what was coming. The process server caught Sarah outside Emily's apartment on a Tuesday morning. She'd been cleared for light activity after a week of bed rest, her baby's heartbeat strong and steady at her follow-up appointment. She was carrying groceries from the corner store when a man in a cheap suit stepped into her path. Sarah Mitchell? Yes. You've been served. He handed her a thick manila envelope and walked away before she could respond. Sarah stood on the sidewalk, grocery bags dangling from one arm, staring at the envelope like it might explode. Inside Emily's apartment, she opened it with shaking hands. Petition for divorce and emergency custody motion. Filed by Derek Robert Mitchell. Sarah read through the legal jargon, each paragraph worse than the last. Derek was seeking dissolution of marriage on grounds of abandonment and emotional instability. He wanted sole legal and physical custody of any children born during the marriage or within 10 months of divorce filing. He demanded an immediate psychiatric evaluation to determine her fitness as a parent. A restraining order preventing her from coming within 500 feet of their marital residence. Full retention of all marital assets based on the claim that she'd contributed no financial value to the marriage. The worst part was at the end, a counterclaim for spousal support, arguing that her malicious abandonment had caused reputational and financial harm to his business. Derek wasn't just divorcing her, he was trying to destroy her. Attached were affidavits that made Sarah's stomach turn. Dr. Helen Strauss, Derek's therapist, a woman who'd never met Sarah, had signed a statement claiming Derek reported that his wife exhibited erratic behavior, mood swings, paranoia, and inability to cope with normal stress consistent with untreated mental illness. Given her instability, Dr. Strauss had grave concerns about Sarah's fitness to parent. Patricia Mitchell, Derek's mother, had submitted her own poison. Sarah has always been fragile. She comes from a lower-class background and never adapted to our family's standards. My son has tried to help her, but some people simply aren't built for this level of society. I fear for my grandchild's safety in her care. The third affidavit was from Vanessa Hunt. As Mr. Mitchell's colleague, I've witnessed Mrs. Mitchell's erratic behavior firsthand. She once appeared at our office unannounced, screaming accusations at Mr. Mitchell. Her behavior was frightening. I genuinely feared she might become violent. Sarah read the last one 3 times. She'd never gone to Derek's office, never confronted him there. It was a complete fabrication. But the most devastating document was the temporary custody order, already signed by Judge Richard Berkeley. Upon birth, child shall be immediately placed in custody of petitioner, father, pending psychiatric evaluation of respondent, mother. Respondent may have supervised visitation only, contingent upon completion of court-ordered mental health treatment. Sarah's baby. They were going to take her baby the moment it was born. She slid down the wall, the papers scattering around her, and called Thomas Whitmore with shaking hands. He filed, she said when the attorney answered. Derek filed for divorce and custody. Thomas, there's a court order. They're going to take my baby when it's born. They're going to take my child and give it to him. I know, Whitmore said grimly. His lawyer served me a copy an hour ago. Sarah, I need you to breathe. Can you do that for me? They're taking my baby? Sarah repeated, hysteria rising in her voice. I'm going to give birth in a hospital, and they're going to hand my child to Derek, to him and Vanessa. I'll lose everything. No, Whitmore said firmly, you won't, because Judge Berkeley signed that order based on lies. Affidavits from people who've never met you, claiming you are mentally ill. A fabricated story about you threatening Derek at his office. None of it's true, and we can prove it. How? Derek's father and the judge are friends. They play golf together. The system is rigged. Then we unrig it, Whitmore said. Sarah, this is exactly what I've been preparing for. Derek thinks he's playing chess. He has no idea you already won the game. You just need to trust me. Can you do that? Sarah looked around Emily's small apartment, at her grocery bags still on the floor, at the divorce papers scattered like broken dreams. She was 17 weeks pregnant, broke, living on her friend's couch, and facing a custody battle against a man with unlimited resources and a judge in his pocket. But she had one thing Derek didn't know about. She owned everything he thought was his. What do we do? Sarah asked. We let him think he's winning, Whitmore said. We file a response to his petition. We show up to court looking exactly how he's painted you. Quiet, understated, powerless. We let him parade his witnesses. Let him build his case. And then, when he's at his most confident, we destroy him with the truth that you're not the dependent wife. You're the owner. And he's been embezzling from your company to fund his mistress. When's the hearing? 3 weeks, December 15th, Judge Berkeley's courtroom. Whitmore paused. Sarah, I need you to do something difficult. I need you to stay quiet for the next 3 weeks. No tweets, no statements, no interviews. Let Derek think he's won. Let him get comfortable. The element of surprise is our only weapon. 3 weeks, Sarah repeated. 3 weeks of letting the world think she was the unstable wife Derek claimed. 3 weeks of sitting silent while he and Vanessa built their life together on her money. 3 weeks of knowing her baby could be taken from her. But if it meant protecting her child, Sarah would do it. Okay, she said, I'll stay quiet. But Thomas, I want one thing. Name it. I want to be there when you tell him, when you reveal that I own Mitchell Capital, when his whole world falls apart. I want to see his face. That, Whitmore said with satisfaction, can absolutely be arranged. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of Sarah's life. She watched from Emily's apartment as Derek's narrative solidified. The media ate up his version of events. The successful CEO, burdened by an unstable wife who couldn't handle his success. The devoted future father, fighting for custody of a child he didn't even know existed yet. Derek gave an interview to Forbes, carefully crafted by his PR team. He spoke about the challenges of balancing work and personal life, about how he tried to help Sarah adjust to Manhattan society, but some people just weren't built for that level of pressure. He expressed concern for her mental health and hoped she'd get the help she needed. The article painted Derek as sympathetic, concerned, the reasonable one, and Sarah, by her silence, looked guilty. It was torture. Every day, Sarah wanted to tweet, to respond, to tell her side. Emily had to physically take her phone away twice. 3 more weeks, Emily would say. Then you can destroy him. But right now, you have to let him think he's won. Sarah channeled her anger into preparation. She spent hours with Whitmore and his team, going over every document, every financial record, every piece of evidence. She practiced her testimony until she could recite it in her sleep. She bought maternity power suits, got her hair cut into a sleek professional bob, and transformed herself from the mousy wife Derek had dismissed into someone who looked like she could run $1 billion company. Because she did. She always had. Derek just didn't know it. Meanwhile, Derek's life seemed to be improving. Mitchell Capital's stock price stabilized after the initial dip from the Gala scandal. Investors who'd threatened to pull out decided to stay. Derek appeared at charity events with Vanessa by his side, both of them looking like Manhattan royalty. In photos, Vanessa's hand rested on her stomach the way pregnant women do, though she wasn't pregnant. It was psychological warfare, showing Sarah what her life could have been, should have been, would never be again. 1 week before the hearing, Sarah had her 20-week ultrasound. Dr. Walsh performed it himself, carefully checking every measurement while Emily held Sarah's hand. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Walsh said, smiling at the screen. "Your baby's growing's feral, no complications. You've done a good job managing your stress." "Can you tell what I'm having?" Sarah asked. Dr. Walsh angled the screen so she could see. "See that? It's a girl. You're having a daughter." Sarah burst into tears. A daughter. She was having a baby girl who would grow up watching how her mother handled this moment. A daughter who would learn, by example, whether it was okay to be treated like a maid or whether you fought back and reclaimed your power. "Her name is Emma," Sarah said, the name coming to her fully formed. "Emma Grace Graham." "Beautiful," Dr. Walsh said. He paused, then added quietly, "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm not supposed to say this, but I've been following your case. What your husband did at that gala was unconscionable. I hope you take him for everything he's worth." Sarah smiled through her tears. "Oh, I plan to. He just doesn't know it yet." The night before the hearing, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in Emily's guest bed, hand on her belly where Emma kicked and turned, and thought about everything that had led to this moment. 8 years of marriage, 8 years of supporting Derek's dreams, 8 years of being told, subtly and not so subtly, that she wasn't quite good enough. Not polished enough, not smart enough, not enough, period. But tomorrow in Judge Berkeley's courtroom, Derek would learn the truth. The wife he'd dismissed, the helper he'd mocked, the maid he'd called simple, owned every brick of the empire he thought he'd built. And she was about to take it all back. Not for revenge, though that would be sweet. Not for money, though she'd claim what was rightfully hers. She was doing this for Emma. For her daughter who deserved a mother who stood up for herself. Who deserved to grow up in a world where women didn't have to make themselves small so men could feel big. At midnight, Sarah finally fell asleep, one hand on her belly, the other clutching her phone with Thomas Whitmore's last text message. "Tomorrow we show them who the real queen is. Get some rest. You're going to need it." Sarah dreamed of crowns and castles and a man in a Tom Ford suit realizing, too late, that he'd just destroyed himself. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. Manhattan Family Court on December 15th was packed with reporters, spectators, and the curious public who'd been following the helper wife saga for weeks. Sarah arrived with Thomas Whitmore at 8:45, dressed in a simple gray maternity dress that made her look small and vulnerable. Strategic. Derek arrived 10 minutes later in a convoy of black SUVs, surrounded by 4 lawyers from the white shoe firm Hastings and Crane. He wore a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His parents flanked him like bodyguards. Vanessa sat in the audience, polished and perfect in navy blue. Sarah watched Derek scan the courtroom and find her. For a moment, their eyes met. She saw his confidence, his certainty that he'd already won. Then he looked away, dismissing her with the same casual ease he'd dismissed her their entire marriage. That was his first mistake. Judge Richard Berkeley entered at exactly 9 o'clock. 68 years old, Yale Law, 3 decades on the bench, and Robert Mitchell's golf partner for 20 years. Sarah had no illusions about which side the judge favored. All rise, the bailiff called. Family court in session. Case number 2024-FC-7832, Mitchell versus Mitchell. Custody petition. Everyone sat. Judge Berkeley reviewed his notes, then looked up. Mr. Hastings, you're representing the petitioner, Mr. Derek Mitchell? Charles Hastings stood, 60 years old and sharp as broken glass. Yes, Your Honor. We're seeking sole custody of the minor child due to be born in March 2025, on grounds that the respondent, Mrs. Sarah Mitchell, is unfit to parent due to emotional instability, financial incapacity, and abandonment of the marital home. Mr. Whitmore, you're representing Mrs. Mitchell? Whitmore stood, calm and measured. Yes, Your Honor. We'll be vigorously contesting these claims and presenting evidence that Mr. Mitchell is, in fact, the unfit parent. Hastings actually laughed. Your Honor, Mrs. Mitchell has no job, no income, no assets. She's been living on her friend's couch for 3 weeks. She can't even afford her own attorney. Mr. Whitmore is working pro bono. How can she possibly claim to be the fit parent? We'll address that in our testimony, Your Honor, Whitmore said smoothly. Judge Berkeley nodded. Very well. Mr. Hastings, call your first witness. Derek took the stand, confident and composed. He was sworn in, sat down, and proceeded to perform exactly as his lawyers had coached him. Mr. Mitchell, please tell the court about your career, Hastings began. I'm the CEO of Mitchell Capital, a private equity firm I founded 8 years ago, Derek said, his voice clear and strong. We manage $1.2 billion in assets. I've been featured in Forbes, Wall Street Journal. I built this company from nothing. Sarah felt Whitmore's hand on her arm. A reminder. Stay calm. Let him lie. We'll destroy him later. And your marriage to the respondent? I married Sarah 8 years ago. She was a CPA, but she quit working after we married. I've supported her entirely since then. Derek's voice took on a tone of sad concern. She wanted to be a stay-at-home wife. I thought that was fine. I wanted her to be happy. Such a liar, Sarah thought. But he demanded she quit, said it would be easier for his career if she wasn't working. Can you describe her behavior in recent months? Derek sighed, playing his role perfectly. She's become increasingly erratic, paranoid, emotional. At our company's charity gala 3 weeks ago, I gave a speech about business philosophy, and she interpreted it as a personal attack. She stormed out, made a scene. Since then, she's refused to come home, refused to communicate. She abandoned our marriage. And when did you learn about the pregnancy? 2 weeks ago, through her medical records, which my attorney subpoenaed. Derek looked directly at Sarah for the first time, his expression one of wounded betrayal. She never told me. She hid my own child from me. That's when I realized she's not stable enough to be a mother. What are you asking this court for? I want sole custody, Derek said firmly. I can provide a stable home, financial security, everything this child needs. Sarah can't even provide for herself. Hastings sat down. Judge Berkeley looked at Whitmore. Your witness. Whitmore stood slowly, like a man with all the time in the world. Mr. Mitchell, you testified that you built Mitchell Capital from nothing. Is that accurate? Yes. Where did the initial capital come from? Derek didn't hesitate. Investors, silent partners. Can you name them? They're anonymous, SM Capital Partners. They prefer to stay out of the public eye. Have you ever met them? No, all communication goes through intermediaries. Whitmore nodded thoughtfully. So you built a billion-dollar company with money from people you've never met? People you can't name? People who've never asked to meet you in 80 years? That's how high-level finance works, Mr. Whitmore, Derek said with barely concealed condescension. Silent investors are common in private equity. I see. Whitmore made a show of consulting his notes. You testified that my client is emotionally unstable. What evidence do you have? She walked out of a public event. She's been hiding for 3 weeks. She won't return my calls. Did you call her after the gala? Derek paused just for a second. I texted. How many times? I don't know. Once or twice. Whitmore pulled out a document. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit A, Mr. Mitchell's phone records. In 3 weeks, he texted Mrs. Mitchell once. The message read, and I quote, "Stop being dramatic. My lawyer will be in touch." That's the extent of his outreach to his pregnant wife. Murmurs in the courtroom. Judge Berkeley frowned. I was giving her space, Derek said quickly. Or you were planning to divorce her and wanted her out of the way, Whitmore said. No further questions at this time. Derek stepped down, and Sarah watched his confidence waver for the first time. But then Hastings called Dr. Helen Strauss, and Derek's certainty returned. Our Strauss took the stand, professional and credible. Hastings led her through the affidavit she'd signed, the one claiming Sarah showed signs of mental illness based entirely on Derek's reports. Whitmore's cross-examination was surgical. Dr. Strauss, you've never met Mrs. Mitchell, correct? Correct. So this professional opinion is based entirely on what her husband told you. Mr. Mitchell is my patient. I trust his reporting, even if he's lying. Objection! Hastings jumped to his feet. Sustained, Judge Berkeley said, but the damage was done. The jury of public opinion in the gallery was already doubting. Patricia Mitchell was next, and she performed exactly as Sarah expected. Cold, dismissive, dripping with class prejudice. Sarah was never suited for our family, Patricia said. She comes from humble circumstances. Derek married beneath his station. I tried to guide her, but she simply doesn't have the breeding or education to raise a Mitchell child properly. Whitmore let her hang herself with her own words, then produced emails showing Patricia had excluded Sarah from every family event for a year. Finally, Vanessa took the stand. She looked nervous, and she should have been. Whitmore had prepared for this moment. Miss Hunt, you claim to have witnessed Mrs. Mitchell's erratic behavior at Mr. Mitchell's office? Yes, she showed up unannounced and started screaming. When was this? About 2 months ago. Whitmore produced security logs. Mitchell Capital's building requires key card access. There's no record of Mrs. Mitchell ever entering the building. In fact, the security footage shows she's never been there. Would you like to revise your statement? Vanessa's face went white. Let me ask you something else, Whitmore continued. How long have you known Mr. Mitchell? 3 years. And your relationship is purely professional? Yes. You've never been to his home? Only for work events. Never spent the night? Vanessa hesitated. No. Whitmore produced hotel records. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit C. Miss Hunt and Mr. Mitchell stayed at the Carlisle Hotel on February 14th, June 3rd, and September 22nd of this year. Same room. All charged to Mitchell Capital's corporate account. The courtroom erupted. Derek's face drained of color. Vanessa looked like she might be sick. On Valentine's Day? Whitmore pressed. That was a business trip? Vanessa stammered. Miss Hunt, how much money have you received from Mitchell Capital in the past 18 months? My salary is $200,000. Through your company. BH Consulting, what does that stand for? Vanessa's lips trembled. Vanessa Hunt Consulting. $11.7 million from Mitchell Capital to VH Consulting for services never rendered. Would you call that a professional relationship? Vanessa couldn't answer. Whitmore turned to Judge Berkeley. Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to request a brief recess to present new evidence that will fundamentally change this case. What kind of evidence? The judge asked, intrigued despite himself. Evidence that Mr. Mitchell has been embezzling from his own company. Evidence that Mrs. Mitchell is not the dependent spouse he claims. And evidence that this entire custody petition is based on fraud. The courtroom exploded with noise. Derek's face went from pale to gray. His lawyers were frantically whispering to each other. Judge Berkeley banged his gavel. Order. Mr. Hastings, I suggest you speak to your client about full disclosure. If I find out he's lied to this court, there will be consequences. We'll reconvene Thursday morning at 9 a.m. This court is in recess. The gavel banged again. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Derek. Sarah watched through the window as he tried to push through them, Vanessa trailing behind, both of them surrounded by cameras and questions they couldn't answer. Then Derek saw her, standing with Whitmore at the courthouse entrance. For a moment, their eyes locked across the plaza. Sarah didn't smile, didn't gloat, just looked at him with absolute calm. And Derek, for the first time in 8 years, looked afraid. He knows something's wrong, Whitmore said quietly, but he doesn't know what. That's good. Fear makes people sloppy. Sarah touched her belly where Emma was kicking. 2 more days, she whispered to her daughter. 2 more days and everyone will know the truth. She walked away from the courthouse, leaving Derek to face the cameras alone. The first shot had been fired. The war was just beginning. Thursday morning arrived with snow falling on Manhattan, turning the city into something from a postcard. Sarah dressed carefully in a charcoal gray maternity suit, the kind that whispered executive rather than victim. She'd spent the past 48 hours in Thomas Whitmore's office, preparing for this moment. Today, Derek Mitchell would learn who his wife really was. Judge Berkeley's chambers had been transformed. Documents covered every surface. Bank statements, wire transfers, corporate ownership papers, emails. The judge had clearly spent the recess reviewing everything Whitmore had submitted, and his expression as he entered the courtroom was grim. Derek looked haggard. He'd aged years in 2 days. His confidence from Monday was gone, replaced by barely concealed panic. His 4 lawyers huddled around him, whispering urgently. Sarah caught fragments. What haven't you told us? Who the hell is SM Capital Partners? If you've lied to us, we're withdrawing. Vanessa wasn't in the courtroom. Smart woman, she'd probably lawyered up. Be seated, Judge Berkeley said, his tone significantly colder than 2 days ago. Before we begin, I want to make something very clear. I've reviewed the evidence submitted by Mr. Whitmore. What I've seen is deeply concerning. Mr. Hastings, does your client wish to make any amendments to his testimony? Charles Hastings stood, looking like a man who just discovered his star witness had lied about everything. Your Honor, my client stands by his testimony. Sarah saw Whitmore smile slightly. Derek's lawyers had advised him to admit nothing. Classic mistake. Very well, Judge Berkeley said. Mr. Whitmore, call your first witness. Your Honor, the defense calls Brandon Price, Chief Financial Officer of Mitchell Capital. Derek's head snapped up. What? Brandon Price walked into the courtroom like a man who'd been waiting for this moment. 42, nervous but determined, he was sworn in and took the stand. Whitmore began gently. Mr. Price, how long have you worked at Mitchell Capital? 5 years. I've been the CFO for 3. In your capacity as CFO, did you notice any irregularities in company finances? Brandon took a deep breath. Yes. Starting in January 2023, Mr. Mitchell began approving large payments to a consulting company called VH Consulting. How large? Over 18 months, approximately $11.7 million. The courtroom gasped. Derek closed his eyes. Did VH Consulting provide services? No, I requested invoices, work product, anything to justify the payments. There was nothing. When I questioned Mr. Mitchell, he told me to approve the payments and not ask questions. He said if I had a problem with it, I could find another job. Did you approve them? Yes, I was afraid I'd lose my job. My wife has cancer. We needed the health insurance, but I kept records, emails, everything. Brandon looked directly at Derek. I'm sorry, Derek, but I can't lie under oath. Whitmore nodded. Who owns VH Consulting? Vanessa Hunt. And who is Vanessa Hunt to Mr. Mitchell? Brandon hesitated, then answered. His mistress. Everyone at the company knows. They're not subtle about it. More gasps. Derek's lawyers were frantically scribbling notes. Whitmore produced documents. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit D, wire transfer records showing $11.7 million transferred from Mitchell Capital to VH Consulting, owned by Vanessa Hunt. These funds were used to purchase Ms. Hunt's Tribeca apartment, her Porsche 911, jewelry from Cartier and Van Cleef, and to fund multiple trips to the Maldives, Paris, and St. Bart's. Judge Berkeley reviewed the documents, his expression darkening with each page. Mr. Mitchell, is this true? Derek stood, shaking. Your Honor, those were legitimate business expenses. A Porsche and a Tribeca apartment are business expenses? Vanessa is a valuable employee, part of her compensation package. Her salary is $200,000 per year, Whitmore interrupted. She received $11.7 million through her shell company. That's embezzlement, Mr. Mitchell. It's my company, my money, Derek shouted, losing control. Is it? Whitmore said quietly. Mr. Price, one more question. Who owns Mitchell Capital? Brandon looked confused. I'm not sure what you mean. Who is the majority shareholder? SM Capital Partners owns 78%. Mr. Mitchell owns 22%. Has Mr. Mitchell ever met SM Capital Partners? Not to my knowledge. They're anonymous investors, ghost backers. We send quarterly reports to a law firm, but that's the only contact. Whitmore turned to Judge Berkeley. Your Honor, the defense now calls Sarah Mitchell to the stand. The courtroom fell silent. Sarah stood, one hand on her pregnant belly, and walked to the witness stand. She was sworn in, sat down, and met Derek's eyes across the courtroom. For the first time in 8 years, he really saw her. Mrs. Mitchell, Whitmore began, can you tell the court about your background? I was a CPA, Sarah said clearly, forensic accountant. I worked for Hansen and Marks for 6 years before I married Derek. I specialized in tracking financial fraud. Derek's face went pale. Why did you leave that career? Derek asked me to. He said he wanted a wife who could focus on our home and family. He said his career required total focus, and it would be easier if I didn't work. Sarah's voice was steady, factual. I didn't want to quit, but I loved him. I wanted to support his dreams, so I did. And your father? He was a patent attorney, Samuel Richardson. He died when I was 25 before I met Derek. He left me a trust fund. I was grieving so deeply that I let his estate attorney handle everything. I signed papers without reading them, accepted the trust without asking questions. I just wanted my father's back. Sarah's voice broke slightly, the only show of emotion. Even Judge Berkeley looked sympathetic. When did you learn about the trust? 6 months ago, I was organizing paperwork for my mother's nursing home admission and found documents from the estate. I contacted my father's attorney, Thomas Whitmore, and learned that my father had invested my inheritance through a venture capital fund called SM Capital Partners. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear snowflakes hitting the windows. And what does SM Capital Partners own? Sarah looked directly at Derek. 78% of Mitchell Capital. The explosion was immediate. Reporters in the back jumped to their feet. Derek stood up, knocking his chair backward. That's impossible! Mr. Mitchell, sit down, Judge Berkeley commanded. Did you know about this? Hastings hissed at Derek. No, she's lying. This is a forgery. It has to be. One more outburst and you're in contempt, the judge warned. Sarah continued calmly as if Derek wasn't having a meltdown 10 feet away. My father named the company after himself, Samuel Mitchell Capital, SM Capital. He wanted to provide for me after he died. The trust has been funding Mitchell Capital since its inception. Every deal Derek has closed, every acquisition, every genius move everyone thinks he made was funded by my father's legacy, by my inheritance. Why didn't you tell your husband? Sarah looked at Derek, really looked at him, because I wanted him to love me, not what I own. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I supported him, he'd see my value as a person, not a bank account. I thought we were partners. When did you plan to tell him? The night of the gala. Sarah's voice hardened. I was 14 weeks pregnant. I had an ultrasound photo in my purse. I was going to tell him 2 things after his speech. First, that we were having a baby. Second, that I owned the company and I wanted us to run it together, as equals, as real partners. What happened instead? He called me a maid in front of 400 people. He compared me to his mistress and said I was too simple to understand his business, the business I own. So I decided he didn't deserve to know about the baby, about the company, about any of it. Whitmore produced documents. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit E, Complete ownership documents for SM Capital Partners. The trust established by Samuel Richardson in 1998. Corporate filings showing SM Capital as 78% owner of Mitchell Capital. All documents verified by 3 independent auditors. Judge Berkeley reviewed them carefully. These appear legitimate. Mrs. Mitchell, you've owned the majority of your husband's company for 8 years? Yes, Your Honor. I only learned about it 6 months ago, but yes, legally I've been the primary stakeholder from day one. And you never told him? Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed strong. I was going to, that night at the gala. I wanted to see if he'd be happy about the baby first, if he still loved me, the woman, not just the helper who managed his household, if he could see me as a partner. She wiped her eyes. But he couldn't. He called me a maid, and I realized the truth. He never wanted a partner. He wanted an audience, someone to make him look good while he built his empire, an empire I was funding without even knowing it. Why are you revealing this now? Sarah touched her belly. Because he's trying to take my daughter. He filed for custody claiming I'm unfit because I have no assets, no income, no ability to provide. But I'm not the dependent spouse he thinks I am. I own a billion-dollar company. I have the resources, the stability, everything he claims only he can provide. And I'm not going to let him take my child based on lies. Mrs. Mitchell, did you abandon your marriage? No, I left a man who publicly humiliated me while I was pregnant with his child. There's a difference. Whitmore turned to the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. Hastings stood for cross-examination, but he was flailing now. Mrs. Mitchell, if you own this company, why are you just revealing it now? This seems very convenient. I've owned it for 8 years. I just didn't know until 6 months ago. But you have no proof you didn't know. I have therapy records, Sarah interrupted, from 4 months ago. When I told my therapist I just discovered the trust and didn't know what to do. Would you like me to enter those? Hastings looked at his notes desperately. Mrs. Mitchell, isn't it true you're using this ownership claim to manipulate this custody case? No, I'm using facts to defend myself against a man who's been stealing from my company to fund his mistress. Objection. Overruled, Judge Berkeley said. She's answering your question, counselor. Hastings had no follow-up. He sat down. Judge Berkeley looked at Derek. Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you know your wife owned your company? Derek stood, and for the first time, Sarah saw real fear in his eyes. No, I had no idea. This is insane. How could I not know? That's an excellent question, Judge Berkeley said dryly. The question is, if you didn't know she owned the company, whose money did you think you were spending when you wired $11.7 million to your mistress? It was company money, my company's money. Except it's not your company, it's hers, which means you embezzled from your wife's company to fund your extramarital affair. Derek looked like he might be sick. Whitmore stood again. Your Honor, I have one more exhibit, text messages between Mr. Mitchell and Ms. Hunt discussing their divorce strategy. The messages were projected on a screen for the whole courtroom to see. Derek to Vanessa, dated 1 week before the gala. Just met with divorce lawyer. Plan, I'll publicly establish I'm the successful one, she's the dependent. Then file claiming she brought nothing to the marriage. Prenup should hold, I keep everything. You and I go public in 6 months. Vanessa, love it. Maybe mention at the gala how I help with business and she doesn't. Plant the seed? Derek, already in my speech, trust me, by the time I'm done, everyone will know she's just along for the ride. The courtroom erupted. Derek's face was ashen. Your Honor, Whitmore said over the noise, the gala speech wasn't a joke. It wasn't drunk humor. It was premeditated character assassination designed to lay groundwork for this divorce and custody battle. Mr. Mitchell planned to destroy his wife's reputation so he could take everything, including her company, which he didn't even know she owned. Judge Berkeley looked at Derek with open disgust. Mr. Mitchell, is this your phone number? Yes, but did you send these messages? Yes, but you don't understand the context. I understand perfectly. The judge's voice was ice. You plan to humiliate your pregnant wife, divorce her, take her child, and steal her company. And you did this while embezzling millions from that same company to fund your mistress. Mr. Mitchell, you've lied to this court, to your wife, and quite possibly to yourself. Derek tried one more time. She hid the ownership from me. She's been lying for 8 years. Sarah spoke from the witness stand, her voice cutting through Derek's outburst. I stayed silent. There's a difference. You lied to investors, to employees, to me. I just chose not to share something you never asked about. You never once asked how your company was funded. You never asked who your silent investors were. You just took the money and built your ego on my inheritance. Derek spun to face her. You let me think I was successful. You let me believe I built something. You did build something, Sarah said quietly. You built a law, and now it's collapsing. Derek lost control completely. You bitch! You fucking... Mr. Mitchell, Judge Berkeley's gavel crashed down. One more word and you're in contempt. Bailiff, if he speaks again, remove him. Derek's lawyer physically pulled him back into his chair. The great Derek Mitchell, self-made billionaire, Forbes 40 under 40, reduced to a sputtering, furious child who just learned he had no power at all. Judge Berkeley looked at both legal teams. I've seen enough. This court will recess until tomorrow morning, at which time I will issue my ruling. Mr. Mitchell, you are ordered not to contact Mrs. Mitchell, not to go near Mitchell Capital offices, and not to leave the state of New York. If you do, I will issue a warrant for your arrest. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Derek whispered. We're adjourned. The gavel fell. Outside, Derek's lawyers abandoned him immediately. Hastings announced to the press that his firm was withdrawing from the case, citing misrepresentation by the client. Vanessa was nowhere to be found. Derek stood alone on the courthouse steps as reporters shouted questions he couldn't answer. Mr. Mitchell, did you know your wife owned the company? Is it true you embezzled millions? Were you planning to steal your wife's assets? Derek tried to push through them, but everywhere he turned were cameras, microphones, judgment. The self-made billionaire myth had exploded in his face. Sarah watched from inside the courthouse, one hand on her pregnant belly where Emma kicked strongly. Emily appeared at her elbow. How do you feel? Sarah watched Derek stumble down the courthouse steps, his Tom Ford suit wrinkled, his face gray, his empire crumbling. I feel, she said slowly, like the maid just took back her castle. Tomorrow, Judge Berkeley would issue his ruling. Tomorrow, the custody battle would be decided. Tomorrow, Derek would learn the full consequences of humiliating a woman who owned everything he thought was his. But today, Sarah had done what she'd promised Emily weeks ago. She'd stopped being silent. She'd stopped waiting for permission. She'd stood in front of the judge and the world and said, I own this, I built this, and you can't take it from me. Today, Sarah Mitchell had reclaimed her power, and Derek, watching from the bottom of the courthouse steps as the snow fell around him, finally understood what it felt like to have everything taken away. The war wasn't over yet, but the battle had been won. Friday morning, December 18th. Sarah dressed in her charcoal suit, but today felt different, ready. Judge Berkeley's courtroom was packed with reporters and spectators who'd followed the helper-wife saga for weeks. Derek looked haggard, aged 10 years overnight. His wrinkled suit and hollow eyes told the story of a man who'd finally realized he'd underestimated the wrong woman. His parents sat behind him, stone-faced. Vanessa was conspicuously absent. Judge Berkeley entered at 9 o'clock sharp, his expression grim. I've reviewed all evidence, testimony, and documentation, the judge began. What I've seen is more than a custody dispute. It's a case study in deception, manipulation, and abuse of power. Derek sat frozen as Judge Berkeley systematically dismantled every lie he'd told. Mr. Mitchell, you came into my courtroom claiming to be a self-made billionaire with an unstable, dependent wife. Every single claim was false. You built your empire on your wife's inheritance without knowing it. You embezzled nearly $12 million from her company to fund your affair. You planned the gala humiliation as calculated character assassination. The judge's voice hardened. You lied to this court, to investors, and to yourself. You called your wife too simple to understand business when she's a trained forensic accountant who owns the majority of your company. You called her a maid, not knowing she was the queen who held your fate. Derek's head fell into his hands. My ruling, full legal and physical custody to Sarah Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell will have supervised visitation only, 2 hours twice monthly, pending psychological evaluation and parenting classes. Child support of $15,000 per month, effective upon birth. Patricia Mitchell gasped as the judge continued. Mrs. Mitchell owns 78% of Mitchell Capital. All corporate assets belong to her. The marital home belongs to her. Mr. Mitchell will vacate within 30 days. Additionally, I'm referring this case to the Manhattan District Attorney for investigation of embezzlement, wire fraud, and corporate theft. Judge Berkeley looked at Derek with open disgust. You systematically destroyed your wife's reputation while stealing from her company. You deserve every consequence coming your way. Sarah was called to make a final statement. She stood, one hand on her pregnant belly, and faced Derek. I loved you. I funded your dreams because I believed in you. I stayed quiet about ownership because I wanted you to love me for who I was, not what I had. But you never wanted a partner. You wanted an audience. Her voice was steady, clear. I'm not taking everything for revenge. I'm taking it back because it was always mine. You borrowed it and broke the terms when you chose humiliation over respect. I hope someday our daughter asks about you, and I can tell her you taught me a most important lesson. Never let anyone convince you that your value is determined by their attention. I'm not pressing criminal charges. I just want you out of our lives, and I want my daughter safe. The gavel fell. Case closed. Outside, reporters swarmed Derek while his lawyers abandoned him, citing client misrepresentation. He stood alone on the courthouse steps, the self-made billionaire myth exploding in his face, cameras capturing every moment of his downfall. Sarah watched from inside, one hand on her belly where Emma kicked. The maid just took back her castle, she whispered. Derek had tried to destroy her. Instead, he destroyed himself, and Sarah had shown the world who the real queen was, not with cruelty or revenge, but with simple, devastating truth. Tomorrow she'd start rebuilding. But today, she'd won. 6 months later, June 15th. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom glittered exactly as it had the night Derek called Sarah a maid. But everything else was different. Sarah stood backstage, 8 weeks postpartum, wearing an emerald Armani gown. Her daughter, Emma Grace, slept in a bassinet nearby, 6 pounds of perfect baby girl. Sarah was here to receive the New York Businesswoman of the Year award in the same room where Derek had humiliated her. You ready? Emily asked. I think so, Sarah said, though her hands trembled slightly. Through the curtain, she could see the same 400 guests who'd witnessed her destruction, the same investors, the same society elite. And Derek, working coat check. His community service for the embezzlement plea deal, 1,000 hours, permanent removal from executive positions in finance. He looked 20 pounds thinner, haunted. Their eyes met. Sarah felt nothing, not anger, not satisfaction, just mild curiosity about the man she'd once loved enough to hide a fortune for. Derek looked away first. The MC announced her. Sarah walked onto that stage with her head high. 6 months ago, I sat in the back of this room while my husband called me a maid, Sarah began. The crowd fell silent. He said I was too simple to understand his business. He was wrong on both counts. I'm not simple, and it wasn't his business. It was mine. She gripped the podium. For 8 years, I believed my value was determined by how much my husband valued me. I thought if I was quiet enough, small enough, he'd finally see me. But you can't make someone see you by making yourself invisible. Sarah looked directly at Derek across the room. Tears ran down his face. That night, I was 14 weeks pregnant. I had an ultrasound photo in my purse. I was going to tell him about our baby and the company I owned. I thought we'd finally be partners. Instead, he called me a maid, and something inside me woke up. Her voice strengthened. I'm not here to tell you I'm a hero. I'm here to tell you I finally stopped waiting for permission to claim what was always mine. To women, if someone tries to make you small, just stand up. The truth is big enough. You don't need anyone to give you power. You just need to stop giving it away. To men, if you have a partner who supports you, pay attention. She's not a maid. She might be the queen. And if you don't see it, someone else will. The standing ovation lasted 2 full minutes. Backstage, Sarah picked up Emma and felt complete. James Walsh appeared. They'd been dating for 3 months. Real dates built on respect and seeing each other as equals. "You were incredible," James said, holding Emma with practiced ease. "And this must be the famous Miss Emma." They left through the back entrance. Sarah looked back once at the plaza. Through the windows, Derek still worked coat check, looking small and insignificant. 6 months ago, he tried to take everything. He'd called her a maid, stolen her money, planned to take her daughter. But Sarah had fought back with truth, and she'd won herself back. The woman buried under 8 years of trying to be what Derek wanted. "She's going to grow up different," Sarah said, looking at Emma. "She'll never think her worth is determined by how much attention a man pays her." James squeezed her hand. "She's lucky to have you." "No," Sarah corrected. "I'm lucky to have her. She saved me. The moment I knew about Emma, I couldn't let her grow up thinking it was okay for people to treat her mother like a servant. I had to fight for her. In her brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, modest but hers, every decision made by her alone, Sarah fed Emma and felt peace. Not the fragile peace of pretending, but the solid peace of knowing who you are." Her phone buzzed, a text from Derek, long and apologetic. "I finally understand what I lost. You deserve better. Emma deserves better. I'm stepping back from visitation because I make her uncomfortable. Maybe someday I'll be worthy of being her father. I'm sorry for everything. You were always the sun. I was just the moon pretending I created my own glow." Sarah read it twice, then typed, "Thank you for your honesty. I accept your apology. I've built a good life. Emma has a good life. We're exactly where we're supposed to be. I wish you peace." She hit send and put her phone away. Derek's growth wasn't her responsibility. It never was. Sarah had everything she needed. A daughter growing up brave and loud, a partner who saw her as human, a company that helped people, a foundation that changed lives. And she'd done it herself, not because someone gave permission, but because she'd stopped waiting for validation from people who'd never give it. The helper wife had shown everyone who the real queen was. But more importantly, she'd shown herself. 3 years later, Sarah sat in her corner office at SM Capital Partners, now rebranded and focused on the Silent Strength Foundation. Photos of Emma lined her desk. The foundation had helped over 5,000 women escape financial abuse. "Mrs. Walsh, Emma's ready for pickup," her assistant said. Mrs. Walsh. Sarah liked her new name. A clean break, a new identity built on partnership. She met James and Emma in Central Park. Her daughter was 3, fearless, loud, completely herself. Emma didn't know about the gala yet, didn't know her father had called her mother a maid. Someday Sarah would tell her, but for now, Emma just knew Mama ran a company that helped women, that James made Sunday pancakes, and that her biological father visited twice a month for awkward but not scary playdates. "Tell the story, Mama," Emma demanded. "The dragon one." Sarah smiled. She'd been telling Emma modified fairy tales since birth. Once upon a time, there was a princess who everyone thought was just a maid. But what nobody knew was that the castle was actually hers. She'd built it stone by stone. Her phone buzzed. Derek texting that he wanted to reduce visitation to once monthly. "Emma doesn't seem comfortable. I think it's better if I step back." Sarah felt sad for Emma, who deserved a father who fought to be present, but also relieved. Derek's visits were always tense. "How do you feel?" James asked. "Like closing a book I finished reading a long time ago," Sarah said. "He finally gets it, but I don't need his validation anymore. I already know who I am." She watched Emma chase butterflies. 3 years ago, she'd been pregnant and terrified, believing she'd lost everything. Now she had a daughter growing up brave, a husband who saw her as equal, a company that helped people. On the gala's 5th anniversary, Sarah did something she'd never done. She went to the plaza alone, stood on that stage, and forgave Derek. "I forgive you for not seeing me, for calling me a maid, for trying to take Emma," she said to the empty ballroom. "I forgive you because holding anger only hurts me. You're just a chapter in a story that had a happy ending, despite you." She paused. "And I forgive myself for staying too long, for believing your version of me. I was young and didn't know better. But I do now, and Emma will too." Sarah walked out without looking back. That chapter was closed. She was the queen. She'd always been the queen. She just needed the world to stop talking long enough to see it. And every woman watching had learned something invaluable. Your worth isn't determined by who sees it. It's determined by what you build. And if someone tries to take what you've built, you fight, not for revenge, not for validation, but for truth, for your children, for yourself. The maid was never a maid. She was always the queen.